Every year, millions of Americans lose power, and every year, the same solution gets marketed to them. A portable generator from the nearest hardware store, usually running a small gasoline engine that burns through fuel in 8 hours and struggles to keep the refrigerator and the sump pump on at the same time. But in rural America, there's a backup power source that most people never consider because it doesn't look like a generator at all. It looks like a tractor. Farmers have known about this for decades. You take a steel box with no engine inside, just an alternator and a gearbox. Bolt it to the back of your tractor, connect a single drive shaft, and the tractor's diesel motor does the rest. Anywhere from 50 to 100 kilowatts. Enough to run an entire house along with a barn full of livestock equipment and a grain dryer at the same time. The machine is called a PTO generator. PTO standing for Power Takeoff. And chances are you've never heard of it. Power takeoff refers to a rotating shaft that sticks out of the back of virtually every farm tractor built in the last 80 years. Its original purpose was to transfer the tractor's engine power to implements like hay balers and grain augers, often mounted via the three-point hitch, the standardized rear attachment system that connects implements to the tractor frame. The shaft itself is standardized too, a splined steel stub that locks into whatever equipment you attach, spinning at either 540 or 1,000 revolutions per minute, depending on the tractor. That 540 revolutions per minute standard was codified in 1927 by the American Society of Agricultural Engineers, now known as ASABE, giving every manufacturer a common specification to build around and turning the PTO into a universal interface across the entire industry. A PTO generator exploits that shaft in a way the original designers probably never imagined. Inside the unit, a gearbox takes the 540 revolutions per minute coming off the tractor and multiplies it up to roughly 1,800 revolutions per minute, the exact speed a 4-pole alternator needs to produce 60 Hz electricity, which is the frequency that runs every outlet in a North American home. No engine required. The tractor provides all the mechanical energy. The generator just converts it into usable power. The catch is that the frequency of the electricity coming out of the generator depends entirely on how fast the shaft is spinning. If the operator lets the tractor idle down even slightly, the frequency drops, and appliances, motors, and electronics downstream start behaving unpredictably or take damage. At 540 revolutions per minute, the shaft completes 9 full rotations every second. The margin for error is essentially zero. The operator sets the throttle, watches the tachometer, and holds it there for as long as the power needs to stay on. That's the deal. The tractor becomes a stationary power plant for as long as the diesel holds out. The power takeoff itself dates back to 1918 when International Harvester put a PTO on its Model 816 tractor, the first production machine to offer one. The idea reportedly came from a French farmer mechanic named Gugas, who had rigged a homemade version about a decade earlier. Within a few years, every major tractor manufacturer followed IHC's lead, and the PTO became standard equipment. The PTO generator came later, and it came out of necessity. In 1935, only about 10% of American farms had electricity from the grid. Utilities looked at the math, 3 or 4 customers spread across a mile of wire, and decided it wasn't worth the investment. Germany and France were already at 90% rural electrification by then. American farmers were still lighting kerosene lamps. Some used small engine-driven light plants from companies like Delco and Kohler, Kohler being the Wisconsin-based engine manufacturer that would go on to become one of the largest generator brands in North America. But Winco, a company founded by 2 brothers in Cherokee, Iowa, saw a different opportunity. The Albers brothers had built their business on the wind charger, a wind-driven battery charger designed for farms without power lines. Around 1950, they introduced a line of PTO generators, the logic being that every farmer already owned a tractor, and the tractor already had more horsepower than any portable generator on the market. The Rural Electrification Administration eventually brought grid power to most of rural America by the late 1950s. But the PTO generator didn't disappear. It just shifted roles from primary electricity source to emergency backup. And it has stayed in that role ever since. The economics are hard to argue with. A 25 kilowatt PTO generator, enough to back up a full-sized house, costs somewhere between $4,000 and $8,000 new. That's for the unit alone, because there's no engine to pay for. Compare that to a home standby generator with the same output, the kind sold by companies like Generac, the market leader in residential standby power. Once you factor in everything from the concrete pad and gas line to the transfer switch installation and electrician's labor, you're looking at $8,000 to $16,000. Ontario's Agriculture Ministry tested this directly and found that PTO generators cost roughly half the price per kilowatt of a comparable standalone unit. The math works because the most expensive component, the engine, is already sitting in the barn, paid for and maintained as part of the tractor's normal life cycle. And the power ceiling is far higher than most people expect. Commercial PTO generators go up to 165 kilowatts, which is more than enough to run a mid-sized commercial building. The residential sweet spot sits between 15 and 50 kilowatts, and the sizing rule is simple. You need about 2 horsepower from the tractor for every kilowatt of electrical output. A 50 horsepower utility tractor can comfortably drive a 25 kilowatt generator all day. There's a fuel advantage built in too. Most farms already store diesel on site in bulk tanks, so there's no scramble for gasoline when the power goes out, and every gas station in the county has a line around the block. I think that's the detail most people overlook. The fuel is already there. In January 1998, a catastrophic ice storm hit eastern Canada and the northeastern United States. Power lines collapsed across Quebec and Ontario under the sheer weight of the ice, and some rural areas went dark for weeks. In Hemingford, Quebec, an apple farmer named Tim Petch lost electricity to his home for 29 days straight. His cold storage, packed with a full season's harvest, would have been a total loss without the tractor-powered generator that the local farmers' union sent to his property. Across the affected region, roughly 10,000 farms relied on PTO generators to keep milking parlors and ventilation systems running, while bulk milk tanks stayed cold enough to prevent spoilage. The fuel bills were staggering. Ontario's Agriculture Ministry later reported that farmers burned an average of 160 liters of diesel per day during the crisis, with some operations going through 400 liters. But the alternative, losing a herd or an entire harvest, was worse. 23 years later, it happened again. When Winter Storm Uri knocked out the Texas grid in February 2021, the result of natural gas infrastructure freezing across the state, exposing years of deferred weatherization that the grid operator ERCOT had never required, dairy farmer Kyle Humphrey in East Texas started his tractor and PTO generator at 2 in the morning as temperatures dropped to -2 degrees Fahrenheit. He ran it for 103 hours without stopping, more than 4 days straight, to keep the milking equipment and refrigeration online. Even then, icy roads blocked the milk trucks, and the farm had to dump roughly 150,000 pounds of product that never made it off the property. There is a reason PTO generators come with warnings that most other power equipment doesn't. The driveshaft that connects the tractor to the generator is one of the most dangerous components on any farm. At 540 revolutions per minute, that shaft completes 9 full rotations every single second, a detail worth repeating because it's the number that determines how little time you have. If something as minor as a loose sleeve or a drawstring makes contact with the spinning shaft, the entanglement happens faster than the human nervous system can react. Safety researchers describe it bluntly. Once you're caught, there is no evasive action. The shaft doesn't slow down, and the tractor engine behind it has hundreds of foot-pounds of torque to keep it turning. Between 1980 and 1989, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health documented 112 deaths in the United States from PTO driveline entanglements alone. In a separate study covering New York farms, researchers inspected over 1,500 driveline implements and found that nearly half were missing their protective shielding entirely. The guards had been damaged, removed for maintenance, and never replaced. There's a second layer of danger that has nothing to do with the shaft itself. Connecting any generator to a home's electrical panel without a transfer switch can send power backward through the utility lines, a phenomenon called backfeed. Some people try to bypass this with what's known in the trade as a suicide cord, a double male plug that connects a generator directly to a wall outlet with live prongs exposed on both ends. Line workers repairing downed cables during a storm have been electrocuted this way, killed by power flowing from a generator they didn't know was connected. A proper transfer switch isolates the home from the grid, and in most jurisdictions, installing one is not optional. It's code. PTO generators aren't sold at Home Depot or Lowe's. You won't find them on the shelf next to the portable inverters or the propane camping units. They're sold through farm equipment dealers and agricultural supply channels, marketed to people who already own the one thing you need to make them work. That's why this technology stays invisible. It requires a tractor and a transfer switch, along with the kind of mechanical knowledge that gets passed down in farming families rather than posted in online buying guides. The machine was always there. Most people just never had a reason to look.